14. As Levin, in the highest spirits, was nearing the house, he heard the sound of a tinkling bell approaching the main entrance. Why, that must be someone from the station, he thought. They would just have had time to get here from the Moscow train. Who is it? Can it be Brother Nicholas? He did say, perhaps I'll go to a watering place, or perhaps I'll come to you. For a moment he felt frightened and disturbed lest his brother's presence should destroy the happy frame of mind that the spring had aroused in him. But he was ashamed of that feeling, and immediately, as it were, opened out his spiritual arms and with tender joy, expected, and now hoped with his whole soul, that it was his brother. He touched up his horse and, having passed the acacia trees, saw a hired 3-horse sledge coming from the station, and in it a gentleman in a fur coat. It was not his brother. Oh, if only it's some nice fellow with whom one can have a talk, he thought. Ah! He cried, joyfully lifting both arms. Here's a welcome guest. Well, I'm glad to see you, he exclaimed, recognizing Oblonsky. I shall know now for certain whether she's married, or when she will be, thought Levin. And on this lovely day he felt that the memory of her did not hurt him at all. You did not expect me, eh? Said Oblonsky, getting out of the sledge with mud on his nose, cheek and eyebrows, but beaming with cheerfulness and health. I've come to see you, that's one thing, he said, embracing and kissing Levin. To get some shooting, that's 2, and to sell the Ergushevo forest, that's 3. That's grand, and what a spring we are having. How did you manage to get here in a sledge? It would have been worse still on wheels, Konstantin Dmitrich, said the driver, whom Levin knew. Well, I'm very, very glad to see you, said Levin with a sincere smile, joyful as a child's. He showed his guest into the spare bedroom, where Oblonsky's things, his bag, a gun in a case, and a satchel with cigars, were also brought, and leaving him to wash and change, Levin went to the office to give orders about the ploughing and the clover. Agatha Mikhailovna, always much concerned about the honour of the house, met him in the hall with questions about dinner. Do just as you please, only be quick, he said, and went out to see the steward. When he returned, Oblonsky, fresh and clean, with hair brushed and face radiant with smiles, was just coming out of his room, and they went upstairs together. How glad I am to have come to you. Now I shall be able to understand what the mysteries you perpetrate here consist of. But seriously, I envy you. What a house! And everything so splendid, so light, so gay, said Oblonsky, forgetting that it was not always spring and bright weather there, as on that day. And your nurse, quite charming. A pretty housemaid with a little apron would be preferable, but with your severe and monastic style, this one is more suitable. Oblonsky had much interesting news to tell, and one item of special interest to Levin was that his brother, Sergei Ivanitch, intended to come and stay in the country with him that summer. Not a word did Oblonsky say about Kitty or about any of the Shcherbatskys. He only delivered greetings from his wife. Levin was grateful to him for his delicacy, and was very glad of his visit. As usual during his solitude, a mass of thoughts and feelings he could not express to those around had collected in his mind, and now he poured out to Oblonsky the poetic joy of spring, his failures, his plans concerning the estate, his thoughts and remarks about the books he had read, and especially the idea of his own book, the basis of which, though he did not notice it himself, was a criticism of all previous works on agriculture. Oblonsky, always pleasant and quick at understanding everything from a hint, was especially pleasant on this visit. There was a new trait in him which Levin noticed and was flattered by, a kind of respect and a sort of tenderness towards him. The efforts of Agatha Mikhailovna and the cook to make the dinner specially nice resulted only in both the hungry friends sitting down to a snack and having to appease their hunger with hors d'oeuvres of bread and butter, smoked goose and pickled mushrooms, and in Levin's ordering the soup to be served without waiting for the pasties with which the cook intended to astonish the visitor. But Oblonsky, though used to very different dinners, found everything delicious. The herb beer, the bread and butter, and especially the smoked goose and pickled mushrooms, the nettle soup and the fowl with melted butter sauce, the Crimean white wine. Everything was delicious, everything was excellent. Splendid, splendid, he said, lighting a thick cigarette after the joint. I seem to have come to you, as one lands from a noisy steamer onto a peaceful shore. So you maintain that the labourer should be studied as one of the factors which should decide the choice of agricultural methods. You know I'm quite an outsider in these matters, but I should think this theory and its application ought to influence the labourer too. Yes, but wait a bit. I'm not talking about political economy, but about the science of agriculture. It should resemble the natural sciences and should examine existing phenomena, including the labourer with his economic and ethnographic. At that moment, Agatha Mikhailovna came in with some jam. "Ah, Agatha Mikhailovna," said Oblonsky, kissing the tips of his plump fingers. "What smoked goose you have! What herb brandy!" "But what do you think, Constantine? Is it not time?" he added. Lavin glanced out of the window at the sun which was setting behind the bare trees of the forest. High time, high time. "Kuzma, tell them to harness the trap," he said, and ran downstairs. Oblonsky went down and himself carefully took the canvas cover off the varnished case, opened it, and set to work to put together his valuable gun, which was of the newest type. Kuzma, already scenting a substantial tip, did not leave Oblonsky for a moment. He put on his stockings and his boots for him, and Oblonsky willingly allowed him to do so. "Constantine, please leave word that if the dealer Ryabinin comes, I told him to come here today, they should ask him in and let him wait." "Are you selling the forest to Ryabinin?" "Yes." "Do you know him?" "Of course I know him. I've had dealings with him positively and finally." Oblonsky laughed. Positively and finally were the dealer's favourite words. "Yes, he does speak very funnily." "She knows where the master is going," he added, patting Laska, who was whining and jumping around Levin, now licking his hand, now his boots and his gun. The trap was standing at the door when they went out. "I told them to harness, though it is not far, but if you like, we can walk." "No, let us drive," said Oblonsky, stepping up into the trap. He sat down, wrapped a rug around his legs, and lit a cigar. "How is it you don't smoke? A cigar is such a... not exactly a pleasure, but the crown and sign of pleasure. Ah, this is life. How delightful. This is how I should like to live." "But who prevents you?" Levin remarked, smiling. "Nah, you're a lucky fella. You've got all you're fond of. You like horses? You have them. Hounds? You have them. Shooting? You get it. Farming? You get it too." "Perhaps it is because I'm glad of what I get, and don't grieve about what I haven't," said Levin, thinking of Kitty. Oblonsky understood and looked at him, but said nothing. Levin was grateful to Oblonsky because, with his usual tact, noticing that Levin was afraid of talking about the Shcherbatskys, he avoided mentioning them. But now Levin wanted to find out about the matter that tormented him, and yet feared to speak of it. "Well, and how are your affairs?" he asked, recollecting how wrong it was of him to be thinking only of his own concerns. Oblonsky's eyes began to glitter merrily. "But you don't admit that one may want a roll while one gets regular rations. You consider it a crime." "And I don't believe in life without love," he answered, understanding Levin's question in his own way. "How can I help it? I am made that way. And really, so little harm is done to anyone, and one gets so much pleasure." "Is there anything new, then?" inquired Levin. "There is." "Well, you know Ossian's type of woman, such as one sees in a dream." "Well, there are such women in reality, and these women are terrible. Woman, you see, is an object of such a kind that study it as much as you will, it is always quite new." "In that case, better not study them." "Ah, no. Some mathematician has said pleasures lie not in discovering truth, but in seeking it." Levin listened in silence, but in spite of all his efforts, he could not enter into his friend's soul and understand his feeling, nor the delight of studying women of that kind. 15. The place where they were going to shoot was not far away, by a stream among young aspen trees. When they had reached the wood, Levin got down and led Oblonsky to the corner of a mossy and marshy glade, already free from snow. He himself went to a forked birch on the other side, and, leaning his gun against the fork of the lower branch, took off his coat, tightened his girdle, and tried whether he could move his arms freely. The old grey-haired Laska, following close on his heels, sat down warily in front of him and pricked up her ears. The sun was setting behind the forest, and the little birches interspersed among the aspen trees stood out clearly against the evening glow, with their drooping branches and their swollen buds ready to burst into leaf. From the thicket, where the snow had not at all melted, the water still flowed in branching streamlets with a gentle rippling sound. Small birds chirped, and now and then flew from tree to tree. In the intervals of profound silence, last year's leaves were heard rustling, set in motion by the thawing of the earth and the growth of the grass. Just fancy, one can hear and see the grass growing, thought Levin, as he noticed a wet, slate-coloured aspen leaf move close to the point of a blade of grass. He stood listening, and gazing down now on the wet, mossy ground, now at the attentive Laska, now at the sea of bare tree-tops stretched out before him at the foot of the hill, and now at the darkening sky streaked with fleecy clouds. A hawk flew leisurely past, high above the distant forest. Another followed in the same direction and vanished. In the thicket the birds chirped louder and more eagerly. A tawny owl hooted nearby. Alaska started, took a few careful steps, and with her head on one side, again listened intently. A cuckoo called beyond the river. It called twice in its usual note, then hoarsely and hurriedly, and got out of time. "Fancy a cuckoo already," said Oblonsky, appearing from behind a bush. "Yes, I heard," answered Levin, so reluctant to disturb the silence of the wood that his own voice sounded unpleasant to him. "They won't be long now." Oblonsky's figure again disappeared behind the bush, and Levin saw the flare of a match, followed by the red glow of a cigarette and a spiral of blue smoke. Click, click. Oblonsky cocked his gun. "And what's that screaming?" he asked, drawing Levin's attention to a long-drawn cry, like the high-pitched whinny of a colt in play. "Don't you know? It's a male hare. But stop talking. Listen, they're coming," Levin almost shouted, cocking his gun. They heard a shrill whistle in the distance, and after the 2 seconds interval so familiar to sportsmen, another followed, and then a third, and after the third whistle came a cry. Levin looked to the right and to the left, and there before him against the dull light blue sky, over the lower branches of the aspen tops, appeared the flying birds. They were flying straight toward him. The nearest sound of their cry, something like the sound made when tightly stretched cloth is steadily torn, seemed close to his ears. The long beak and neck of a bird were quite visible, and just as Levin took aim, a red flash came from behind the bush where Oblonsky was standing, and the bird descended like an arrow and then fluttered up again. Another flash, followed by a report, and the bird, flapping its wing as if trying to keep up in the air, remained stationary for a moment, and then with a heavy thud fell on the swampy ground. "Can I have missed?" cried Oblonsky, who could not see through the smoke. "Here it is," answered Levin, pointing to Alaska, who with one ear erect, wagging her fluffy, high-arched tail, stepping slowly, as if to prolong the pleasure, and seeming almost to smile, brought the dead bird to her master. "Well, I'm glad you got it," said Levin, and while he spoke he was already experiencing a feeling of envy at not having killed the bird himself. "A wretched miss with the right barrel," replied Oblonsky, reloading. "Hush! Coming!" Indeed, they heard 2 shrill whistles quickly following each other. 2 snipe, playing and racing one another, whistling but not crying, flew almost over the sportsmen's heads. Then there were 4 reports. The birds took a swift turn like swallows and vanished from sight. The shooting was splendid. Oblonsky brought down 2 more birds, and Levin brought down 2, of which one was not recovered. It began to get dark. Through the young birches, Venus bright and silvery was already shining with her delicate glitter low down in the west, and high up in the east flickered the red fire of the dim Arcturus. Above his head Levin found, and again lost, stars of the Great Bear. The snipe had ceased flying, but Levin decided to stay until Venus, which he could see underneath a branch, should rise above it, and all the stars of the Great Bear should be visible. Venus had risen above the branch, and the car of the Great Bear, as well as its shafts, showed clearly against the dark blue sky, but he still waited. "Is it not time to go?" asked Oblonsky. It was quite quiet in the wood, not a bird stirred. "Let's stay a little longer," answered Levin. As you please. They were now standing some 15 yards apart. Stephen, said Levin suddenly and unexpectedly, why don't you tell me whether your sister-in-law is married, or when she will be? Levin felt so strong and calm that he thought the answer, whatever it might be, could not agitate him. But he did not at all expect the reply Oblonsky gave him. She has not thought and is not thinking of getting married, but she is very ill and the doctors have sent her abroad. They are even afraid for her life. You don't mean it, exclaimed Levin. Very ill? What's the matter with her? How did she... While they were talking, Laska, pricking her ears, kept looking up at the sky and then reproachfully at them. What a time they've chosen to talk, thought she, and there it comes flying. Just so, here it is. They'll miss it. But at that moment both men heard a shrill whistle that seemed to smite on their ears. They both seized their guns, and there were 2 flashes and 2 reports at the same moment. The woodcock that was flying high up instantly folded its wings and fell into the thicket, bending down the thin young shoots. That's good, it belongs to both, cried Levin, and ran into the thicket with Laska to look for the bird. Oh, but there was something unpleasant, he thought. Yes, of course, Kitty is ill. But what can I do? I'm very sorry, he thought. Found? Good dog, he said, taking the warm bird from Laska's mouth and putting it into his well-filled game bag. We found it, Stephen, he shouted. 16. On their way home, Levin inquired the particulars of Kitty's illness and of the Shcherbutskys' plans, and though he would have been ashamed to confess it, what he heard was agreeable to him. It was agreeable because there was still hope for him, and even more because she was suffering, she who had made him suffer so much. But when Oblonsky began to speak of what caused Kitty's illness, and to mention Vronsky's name, Levin interrupted him. I have no right whatever to know such family details, and frankly, I'm not interested in them either. Oblonsky gave a scarcely perceptible smile on noticing the quick change, so familiar to him, in Levin's face, which became as gloomy as it had been bright a moment before. Have you finally settled with Ryabinin about the forest? Asked Levin. Yes, I have. I'm getting a splendid price for it. 38,000 rubles. 8 at once, and the rest to be paid within 6 years. I've been bothering about it a long time. No one would give more. The fact is that you are giving the forest away, said Levin moodily. Why giving away? Said Oblonsky with a good-natured smile, knowing well that everything would now seem wrong to Levin. Because the forest is worth at least 500 rubles a desyatina, replied Levin. Ah, you country gentleman, said Oblonsky jokingly, and your tone of contempt for us poor town folk. But when it comes to getting business done, we do it better than anyone. Believe me, I've reckoned it all out, continued he, and I've sold the forest so well that I'm afraid he may change his mind. You know it's not timber, but, for the most part, only fit for fuel, said he, hoping by this remark finally to convince Levin of the injustice of his suspicion. And it will not yield more than 10 sachins of wood to the desyatina. And he's paying me at the rate of 200 rubles. Levin smiled contemptuously. I know this manner, he thought, not his only, but all townsmen's, who visit the country 2 or 3 times in 10 years, get hold of 2 or 3 expressions, use them in and out of season, and are firmly convinced they know everything. Timber and yield 10 sachins. He uses these words but understands nothing about the business. I should not try to teach you the things you scribble about at your office, he said, but in case of need would come to you for advice about them. But you are firmly convinced that you understand all this forest lore. It is not easy. Have you counted the trees? How can one count the trees? Said Oblonsky, still anxious to dispel his friend's ill humour. Count grains of sand and planets' rays, even though a lofty mind were able. Well, Ryabinin's lofty mind is able to do it, and no dealer will ever buy without first counting, unless the forest is given to him for nothing, as you are doing. I know your forest. I go shooting there every year, and it is worth 500 rubles a desyatina cash down, and he's paying you 200 on long term. That means that you've made him a present of about 30,000 rubles. Come, don't get too carried away, said Oblonsky piteously. Why did no one offer more? Because he and the other dealers are in league, and he has bought them off. I've had dealings with them all, and I know them. They are not genuine dealers, but sharks. He would not consider a deal which would bring him in 10 or 15%. He waits till they can buy at a fifth of the value. Ah, come, you're down in the dumps today. Not at all, said Levin gloomily, just as they drove up to the house. At the porch stood a little cart strongly bound with leather and iron, and to the cart was harnessed a well-fed horse with broad, tightly stretched straps. In the cart sat Ryabanin's clerk, who also performed the coachman's duties, his skin tightly stretched over his full-blooded face and his belt drawn tight. Ryabanin himself was already in the house and met the two friends in the hall. He was a tall, spare, middle-aged man, with a moustache, a prominent shaven chin, and prominent dim eyes. He wore a long-skirted blue coat with buttons very low down at the back, high boots drawn quite straight over the calves of his legs and crinkled round the ankles, and over them he had on a pair of large galoshes. He wiped his face all round with his handkerchief, and smoothing his coat, which was already quite in order, smilingly greeted the new arrival. He held out his hand to Oblonsky, as if he were trying to catch something. "Oh, so you've come," said Oblonsky, taking his hand. "That's right. I dare not disobey your Excellency's commands, though the roads are quite too bad. I've literally had to walk all the way, but I have arrived in time. Constantine Dmitrievich, my respects to you," he said, turning to Levin and trying to catch his hand too. But Levin, frowning, pretended not to see the hand, and began taking the snipe out of the game bag. "You've been pleased to amuse yourself with shooting. What kind of bird may that be?" added Ryabanin, looking contemptuously at the snipe. "Something tasty?" And he shook his head disapprovingly, as if much doubting whether this game were worth the candle. "Would you like to go into my study?" said Levin, frowning moodily, and addressing Oblonsky in French. "Go into the study. You can talk things over there." "That would do very well." "Oh, wherever you like," remarked Ryabanin with contemptuous dignity, as if to show them that though others might find it difficult to know how to behave with different people, yet for him no difficulty of any kind could ever exist. On entering the study, Ryabanin looked round by force of habit, as though to find the icon, but after finding it he did not cross himself. He glanced at the book cupboards and bookshelves with the same look of doubt as he had bestowed on the snipe, smiled contemptuously, and again shook his head disapprovingly, decidedly refusing to admit that this game could be worth the candle. "Well, have you brought the money?" asked Oblonsky. "Take a seat." "There won't be any difficulty about the money. I've come to see you and talk to matters over." "Talk what matters over? But do take a seat." "I can do that," said Ryabanin, sitting down and putting his arm on the back of his chair in a most uncomfortable way. "You must let me off something, Prince. You're wronging me. As to the money, it is all ready to the last kopeck. There will be no delay about the money." Levin, who had been putting away his gun in a cupboard, was just going out of the door, but on hearing the dealer's words he stopped. "As it is, you are getting the forest for next to nothing," he said. "He came to me too late, else I would have fixed a price." Ryabanin rose and smiled silently, surveying Levin from his feet to his head. "He's very close, is Constantine Dmitrievich," he said, addressing Oblonsky with a smile. "It's absolutely impossible to buy anything of him. I've been bargaining with him for wheat and offering a good price." "Why should I give you what is mine for nothing? I've not found it on the ground nor stolen it." "Oh dear no, nowadays it's quite impossible to steal. Absolutely everything nowadays goes before a jury. Everything is judged honourably. There's no possibility of stealing. We speak honestly. It's too much for the forest. There's no making any profit on it. I'm asking to have something knocked off, if only a trifle." "Well, have you settled the business or not? If you have, there's no use bargaining. But if not," said Levin, "I will buy the forest myself." The smile vanished from Ryabanin's face, which assumed a hawk-like, rapacious and cruel expression. With his bony fingers, he rapidly unfastened his coat, exposing his braided shirt, the brass buttons of his waistcoat, and a watch chain, and quickly took out a thick old pocket-book. "If you please, the forest is mine," he said, rapidly crossing himself and holding out his hand. "Take your money. The forest is mine." "That's the way Rabinin does business. No fussing about kopecks," he said, frowning and flourishing his pocket-book. "If I were you, I shouldn't be in a hurry to take it," remarked Levin. "What do you mean?" said Oblonsky with surprise. "Why, I've given my word." Levin went out and slammed the door. Ryabinin looked at it and smiled, shaking his head. "That's all his youthfulness, his absolute childishness. Why, I'm making this purchase, believe me, just for the honour and glory of the thing, so that it should be Ryabinin and not another that has bought Oblonsky's forest. But it's still a question whether by God's mercy I can make a profit. Believe me, before God. Please, sir, the agreement must be written." An hour later, the dealer, with his coat well lapped over, the hooks of his overcoat carefully fastened, and with the agreement in his pocket, seated himself in his little cart and drove home. "Ah, these gentlefolks," he remarked to his clerk, while hooking up the leather apron of the cart. "Regular objects." "But may I congratulate you on the purchase, Michael Ignatitch?" "Well, well." 17. Oblonsky went upstairs, his pockets bulging with the treasury bills payable in 3 months' time with which Rabinin had paid him. The forest transaction was completed. He had the money in his pocket. The shooting had been fine. Oblonsky was in the best of spirits, and therefore all the more anxious to dispel Levin's ill humour. He wanted to finish the day at supper as pleasantly as he had begun it. Levin really was in a bad humour, and in spite of his desire to behave kindly and amiably to his charming guest, he could not master himself. The intoxication of the news that Kitty was not married was beginning little by little to take effect on him. Kitty was unmarried and ill for love of the man who had slighted her. This insult seemed to fall upon him. Vronsky had slighted her, and she had slighted him, Levin. Consequently, Vronsky had a right to despise him, and was therefore his enemy. But Levin did not think all this. He dimly felt that there was something insulting to him in the affair, and was angry not with what had upset him, but with everything that presented itself to him. The stupid sale of the forest, the swindle Oblonsky had fallen a prey to, which had been perpetrated in his house, irritated him. "Well, have you finished?" he said, when he met Oblonsky upstairs. "Will you have some supper?" "I won't say no. What an appetite I get in the country. Wonderful. Why did you not offer Ryabinin something to eat?" "Let him go to the devil." "Why, really, how you treat him," said Oblonsky. "You didn't even give me your hand. Why not shake hands with him?" "Because I do not shake hands with the footman, and the footman is 100 times better than he." "What a reactionary you really are. What about merging the classes?" said Oblonsky. "Let those who like it merge to their heart's content, but it sickens me." "I see you're quite reactionary." "I've really never considered what I am. I'm Constantine Levin, that's all." "And Constantine Levin is in a very bad temper," said Oblonsky, smiling. "Yes, I am in a bad temper, and do you know why? Because, excuse me, of your stupid sale." Oblonsky wrinkled his face good-naturedly, like an innocent man who was being hurt and interfered with. "Ah, don't," he said. "When has a man ever sold anything without being told immediately after that it was worth much more? But while he's trying to sell, nobody offers him more. No, I see you have a grudge against that unfortunate Ryabinin." "Maybe I have. Do you know why? You will again call me a reactionary, or some other dreadful name, but all the same it vexes and hurts me to see, on all sides, the impoverishment of the noblesse, to which I too belong, and to which, in spite of the merging of the classes, I am very glad to belong. And impoverished not from extravagance. That would not matter so much. To spend like a nobleman is their business. Only the noblesse know how to do it. At present, the peasants around here are buying land. That does not pain me. The squire does nothing. The peasant works and squeezes out the idler. That is as it should be, and I am very glad on the peasant's account. But it hurts me to see this impoverishment as a result of Shall I call it simplicity? Here a Polish leaseholder buys for half its value the splendid estate of a lady who lives in Nice. There, land that is worth 10 rubles a desyatina is leased to a merchant for 1 ruble. And now you, without any reason, have presented that scamp with 30,000 rubles. Then what do you want? Is one to count every tree? Certainly count them. You've not counted them, but Ryabanin has. Ryabanin's children will have the means to live and get an education, while yours may not have. Well, forgive me, but there is something petty in all this counting. We have our occupation, and they have theirs, and they have to make a profit. Anyway, the thing is done, and there's an end to it. And here come the fried eggs, just the way I like them best. And Agatha Mikhailovna will give us some of that excellent herb brandy. Oblonsky sat down to table and began joking with Agatha Mikhailovna, assuring her that it was long since he had had such a dinner and supper as that day. Well, you appreciate it at least, said Agatha Mikhailovna, but Constantine Dmitrich, whatever one gives him, if it were only a crust of bread, would just eat it and go away. Try as Levin would to control himself, he remained morose and silent. There was one question he wanted to put to Oblonsky, but could not bring himself to ask, nor could he find the form to put it in, or the moment to ask it. When Oblonsky had gone down to his room, and, after again washing, had put on his frilled nightshirt and got into bed, Levin still lingered in his room talking about various trifles, and unable to ask what he wanted to know. What wonderful soap they make, he said, examining and unwrapping a cake of scented soap Agatha Mikhailovna had prepared for the visitor, but which Oblonsky had not used. Just look, it's quite a work of art. Yes, there are all sorts of improvements in everything now, said Oblonsky with a moist and beautiful yawn. In the theatres, for instance, and all places of amusement. He yawned. Electric light everywhere. Yes, electric light, said Levin. Yes, by the by. Where's Vronsky now? He asked, suddenly putting down the soap. Vronsky, said Oblonsky, ceasing to yawn. He's in Petersburg. He left soon after you did, and has not been in Moscow once since then. And do you know, Constantine, I will tell you quite frankly, he said, leaning his elbow on the table by his bed, and supporting on his hand his good-looking rosy face with its glittering kind and sleepy eyes. It was your own fault. You were frightened of a rival. But as I told you then, I do not know who had the better chance. Why did you not make a dash for it? I told you at the time that... He yawned, but only with his jaw, without opening his mouth. Does he, or does he not know that I proposed? Thought Levin, looking at him. Yes, there was something sly and diplomatic in his face, and feeling himself blush, he gazed in silence straight into Oblonsky's eyes. If there was anything on her side at that time, it was only the external attraction, continued Oblonsky. You know his being a perfect aristocrat, and his future position in society had an effect, not on her, but on her mother. Levin frowned. The insult of the refusal he had had to face burned in his heart like a fresh, newly received wound. But he was at home, and the walls of home are helpful. Wait, he began, interrupting Oblonsky. You talk of his being an aristocrat, but I should like to ask you what is Vronsky's, or anyone else's aristocracy, that I should be slighted because of it. You consider Vronsky an aristocrat. I don't. A man whose father crawled up from nothing by intrigues, and whose mother has had relations with heaven knows whom. No, pardon me, I consider myself and people like me aristocrats. People who can point back to 3 or 4 honourable generations of their family, all with a high standard of education. Talent and intelligence are a different matter. Who have never cringed before anyone, never depended on anyone, but have lived as my father and my grandfather did. I know many such. You consider it mean for me to count the trees in my wood, while you give Ryabanin 30,000 rubles. But you will receive a government grant, and I don't know what other rewards, and I shan't, so I value what is mine by birth and labour. We, and not those who only manage to exist by the bounty of the mighty of this world, and who can be bought for a piece of silver, are the aristocrats. But whom are you driving at? I agree with you, said Oblonsky sincerely and cheerfully, though he felt that Levin ranked him with those who could be bought for silver. Levin's vehemence sincerely pleased him. Whom are you driving at? Though much of what you say is not true of Vronsky, I'm not speaking about that. I want to tell you candidly that if I were you, I'd come to Moscow now with me and... No, I don't know if you knew it or not, and I don't care, but I will tell you. I proposed and was refused, and your sister-in-law, Katerina Alexandrovna, is now only a painful and humiliating memory to me. Why? What nonsense! But don't let us talk about it. Forgive me, please, if I've been rude to you, said Levin. Now they had spoken out, he became once more as he had been in the morning. You're not angry with me, Stiva. Please don't be angry, he said, smiling, and took his hand. Oh, no, not at all. There's nothing to be angry about. I'm glad we've had this explanation. And, do you know, the shooting in the early morning is often very good. Should we not go? I would not sleep again after it, but go straight from there to the station. A capital idea.